My parents violently kicked me onto the freezing streets to house my sister's 4 kids, mocking my miserable camper life. So, when they barged into my newly purchased dream home demanding the deed, I sprung an ironclad legal trap. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The memory of that night still burns in my chest, a cold and suffocating weight that no amount of time or money has ever truly erased. 2 years ago, I was 27 years old, and my body was failing me. A severe respiratory infection had taken root in my lungs, leaving me bedridden with a fever that hovered dangerously close to 103 degrees. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of broken glass, and simply lifting my head from the pillow sent the room spinning into a blur of dizzying gray. I was living in my childhood bedroom, contributing a significant portion of my junior software engineering salary to my parents, Wesley and Linda, just to help keep their heads above water. I had believed, in my naive and feverish state, that family was a sanctuary. I was tragically mistaken. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, the kind of night where the rain falls in freezing, unrelenting sheets, lashing violently against the window panes. I was huddled under 3 blankets, shivering uncontrollably despite the sweat soaking through my pajamas, when my bedroom door was suddenly shoved open. It didn't open with the gentle hesitation of a concerned mother checking on her sick daughter. It hit the wall with a loud, aggressive thud. I weakly opened my crusty, swollen eyes. Standing in the doorway was Linda, my mother. She wasn't holding a thermometer, a glass of water, or a bowl of soup. She was holding a stack of heavy-duty black trash bags. Behind her stood Wesley, my father, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw set in a rigid, unyielding line. And lingering just out of focus in the hallway was my older sister, Clara. "Get up, Lucy," Linda commanded. Her voice was entirely devoid of any maternal warmth. It was sharp, clinical, and completely detached. "We need this room, now." I blinked, my fever-addled brain struggling to process the words. "Mom," I croaked, my throat raw and screaming in agony. "What are you talking about? I can barely stand." "Don't start with the dramatics, Lucy," Wesley boomed, taking a step into my room. He didn't look at me with sympathy. He looked at me like I was a piece of broken furniture taking up valuable floor space. "Clara is moving back in, with the 4 kids. Things aren't working out with Christopher, and she needs the master bedroom. Your mother and I are taking the guest room, which means this room is for the twins." You want me to leave?" I whispered, a wave of profound nausea washing over me. "Tonight, Dad, look outside." "It's pouring freezing rain. I'm sick." "We gave you a roof over your head for 27 years, Linda snapped, unfolding a black plastic bag with a sharp, echoing crinkle. She immediately began grabbing my clothes from the open closet, haphazardly shoving them into the dark plastic. Sweaters, dresses, shoes, all tossed in like garbage. "You are a single adult woman. Clara is a mother in crisis. She needs her village. You are being entirely selfish by lying in that bed and fighting us on this." I tried to sit up, but the dizziness forced me back down. "Mom, please, just let me stay until the morning, just until the fever breaks. I'll call a hotel tomorrow, please." Clara finally stepped into the frame, leaning against the door jamb. She didn't look like a mother in crisis. She looked perfectly manicured, her hair blown out, holding a designer coffee cup that I had likely paid for through the various loans she had extracted from me over the years. "Come on, Lucy," Clara sighed, rolling her eyes as if my severe illness was nothing more than a personal inconvenience to her. "The kids are in the minivan. They are tired. They want to set up their new room. Stop making everything about you for once in your life." I watched in absolute, paralyzed horror as my parents stripped my life down to 3 black garbage bags within 10 minutes. I begged. I cried. I pleaded with Wesley, reminding him that I had just paid the mortgage that very morning. He completely ignored me, picking up the bags and hauling them downstairs. Linda practically pulled the blankets off my shivering body. I stumbled down the stairs in my pajamas and a heavy winter coat I had blindly grabbed, my legs trembling so violently I nearly fell twice. When I reached the front door, Wesley shoved my keys and my laptop bag into my chest. He opened the front door, letting the howling, freezing wind tear through the entryway. "You'll figure it out. You're smart," Wesley said, his voice flat. He physically pushed me out onto the wet concrete of the porch. I lost my footing and fell hard onto my knees, the freezing rain immediately soaking through my thin pajama pants, sending a shocking jolt of icy pain straight to my bones. I turned around, gasping for air, reaching out toward the door. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself, for the cold of the storm outside was nothing compared to the ice in my mother's eyes as she locked the door. The immediate aftermath was a blur of pure survival instinct and devastating physical agony. I spent that first night sleeping in the driver's seat of my rusted 10-year-old sedan, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights of a 24-hour supercenter. My fever raged, causing terrifying hallucinations in the cramped, freezing car. I woke up the next morning coughing up dark phlegm, utterly alone, with nothing but a few garbage bags of clothes and my work laptop. I had about $3,000 to my name in a checking account, the rest of my recent paychecks having gone directly into Wesley and Linda's bank accounts to cover their supposedly past due property taxes. Desperation drove me to the absolute bottom of the local classifieds. I couldn't qualify for an apartment lease quickly enough without a massive deposit, and hotels would drain my meager funds within a week. That was how I found the camper. It was a 1998 travel trailer sitting in a muddy lot on the outskirts of town, advertised for exactly $1,000 cash. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of damp rot, old tires, and stale cigarette smoke hit me like a physical blow. The linoleum floor was curling at the edges, the tiny propane heater was severely rusted, and the roof had a visible sag in the center. But it had a locking door, a tiny desk, and a place to lay a mattress. I handed over the cash, towed it to a cheap RV park with a shaky Wi-Fi connection, and collapsed onto the thin, mildew-scented cushions. For the next 6 months, that $1,000 camper was my entire universe. The winters were brutally, dangerously cold. I slept in a heavy winter coat, 2 pairs of sweatpants, and a beanie, my breath forming visible white plumes in the tiny space. I rigged up heavy thermal curtains to block out the drafts and used a small space heater that constantly tripped the breaker. But I still had my remote job as a software engineer. Every single day, I sat at that cramped, wobbly dinette table, tethered to a mobile hotspot, writing code while wrapped in blankets. I didn't go out. I didn't buy new clothes. I ate cheap canned soup and rice. I saved every single penny with a terrifying, singular obsession. My family, however, couldn't simply let me vanish into my misery. They needed to ensure I knew my place in their hierarchy. It happened on a bitterly cold Saturday in February. I was outside trying to patch a slow leak in the camper's roof with some heavy-duty tape when a large, pristine white SUV pulled into the gravel lot of the RV park. I froze, my hands numb with cold. It was Clara's SUV, the very same SUV I had co-signed on 3 years prior because her credit was utterly ruined. The window rolled down and Clara leaned out, wearing an expensive faux fur coat. In the back seat, I could see 2 of her children pressing their faces against the glass, pointing their small fingers at me. "Wow," Clara called out, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. Her eyes raked over the muddy lot, the rusted exterior of my tiny home, and finally settled on my pale, exhausted face. "Mom said you hit rock bottom, but I didn't think you were literally living in a tin can in a swamp." "Nice mansion, Lucy." I stood there, holding the roll of duct tape, my teeth practically chattering. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just wanted to see it for myself," she laughed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the winter air. "Mom and Dad are throwing a huge dinner party tonight to celebrate the kids getting settled in their new bedrooms. We thought about inviting you, but, well, you don't really have anything nice to wear, do you? And you probably smell like a wet dog." She didn't come to check on my health. She didn't come to see if I had food. She drove 45 minutes out of her way solely to bring an audience to humiliate me. "You have the master bedroom, Clara," I said, my voice steadying, refusing to give her the satisfaction of my tears. "You have what you wanted. Why are you here?" "To remind you of reality," she sneered, her smile fading into an ugly grimace. "You were always so high and mighty with your tech job and your money. Look at you now, a complete loser living in a trash heap. Don't ever think you're better than us." She rolled up the window without another word and sped off, kicking up freezing mud onto my boots. I watched her taillights disappear down the highway, feeling a profound, terrifying emptiness settle into my chest. I turned back to my rusted, freezing tin can. I walked inside, locked the flimsy door, and sat down at my laptop. I opened my banking application and looked at the rapidly growing savings account I had been fiercely guarding. I was pulling down a massive six-figure salary, and with essentially zero living expenses, my wealth was compounding in total secrecy. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was destitute, pathetic, and defeated. But as Clara laughed and drove away, leaving me shivering in a tin can, she had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who had funded their lavish lifestyles for years, and now all of that financial power belonged solely to me. To truly understand the depth of their betrayal, you have to understand the decades of sacrifice I had poured into that family. I wasn't just the youngest daughter. I was the designated financial lifeboat. When Clara decided she wanted a lavish wedding to Christopher, a freelance mechanic with a history of terrible financial decisions, it was my college fund that Wesley and Linda drained to pay for the catering and the venue. When Christopher's business went under, it was my first major tech bonus that kept their house out of foreclosure. I spent my early 20s denying myself vacations, dates, and simple luxuries, conditioned by my parents to believe that Clara's needs, and by extension the needs of her rapidly growing family, always superseded my own. Clara was a master manipulator, a woman who wore her victimhood like a designer accessory. She had cultivated a polished, perfect aesthetic, expensive salon hair, flawless makeup, and a wardrobe of high-end brands that completely contradicted her status as a perpetually broke stay-at-home mother. She had an uncanny ability to walk into a room and instantly assess the financial utility of everyone in it. If you couldn't offer her money, free babysitting, or a place to live, she discarded you. My parents enabled this behavior entirely, viewing Clara as fragile and me as an endless, unbreakable resource. Which brings us to the present day. 2 years had passed since the night in the freezing rain. 2 years of grueling, silent work in that $1,000 camper. 6 months ago, I finally sold the rusted tin can to a scrapyard and executed the master plan I had been meticulously building. Through a massive accumulation of stock options, relentless saving, and several lucrative promotions, I had purchased a stunning, sprawling 4-bedroom house on 3 acres of private woodland. It was modern, bathed in natural light, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a state-of-the-art kitchen, and a massive wraparound deck. It was a fortress of peace. It was my sanctuary. I never told my family. I had blocked their numbers and cut all contact the day I left the RV park. I was finally happy, healthy, and safe, until Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my expansive home office, sipping herbal tea and reviewing some code on my ultra-wide monitors when the chime of my high-end security gate rang through the house. I frowned. I wasn't expecting any deliveries. I pulled up the live feed on my tablet. My blood ran completely cold, the heavy mug slipping from my fingers and shattering on the hardwood floor. Sitting at my private security gate, repeatedly pressing the call button with aggressive impatience, was Clara's pristine white SUV. Behind her, parked carelessly on the edge of the road, was Wesley's truck. Panic seized my throat. How did they find me? I had purchased the property under an LLC specifically to keep my name off public property records. I had forwarded my mail to a private PO box. Yet, somehow, they had hunted me down. Before I could even process the breach in my security, the gate, which I had left open slightly for the landscaping crew earlier, began to slowly retract. They had pushed the manual override on the outer keypad. I stood up, my heart hammering violently against my ribs as I watched the vehicles barrel up my long, winding driveway. They parked haphazardly on the immaculate cobblestone driveway. I watched through the front window as doors slammed open. Wesley stepped out first, looking older but just as arrogant. Linda followed, carrying a large tote bag. Finally, Clara emerged. She stood there for a long moment, staring up at the stunning architecture of my home. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the immediate calculation in her eyes. She wasn't looking at my home with pride for her sister. She was assessing the square footage, the expensive landscaping, and the sheer value of the asset. She looked like a predator who had just stumbled upon a feast. The heavy, custom-made oak front door shuddered violently as fists began pounding against the wood. "Lucy, open this door right now." Wesley's voice bellowed, loud and demanding, shattering the peace I had fought so hard to build. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the terror down, and unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy oak door open. Clara immediately pushed past me without a word of greeting, bringing the scent of heavy perfume into my pristine entryway. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize for 2 years ago. She simply spun around in the foyer, gazing at the vaulted ceilings and the sweeping staircase. "Wow," Clara breathed, her eyes wide with undisguised greed. She turned back to me, a sickeningly sweet, entirely fake smile stretching across her face. "Mom said you had crawled out of that embarrassing little trailer, but I had no idea. This is absolutely perfect, Lucy. The twins can take the bedrooms upstairs, and the baby's nursery can go down the hall. We're moving in on Friday." For a long, suffocating moment, the only sound in the grand foyer was the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I simply stared at Clara, my brain struggling to comprehend the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her statement. She was completely serious. She was looking around my home, pointing out where she intended to place her furniture, as if I were merely a real estate agent giving her a tour of a property she had already purchased. "Moving in," I repeated, my voice dangerously soft, barely more than a whisper. The terror that had gripped me moments ago instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline anger that sharpened my senses to a razor's edge. Wesley crossed his arms, stepping further onto my imported rugs with his muddy boots. "Don't take that tone, Lucy," he reprimanded, using the exact same authoritative voice he used when I was 12. "Your sister is in a tight spot. Christopher locked her out of their accounts. She has the kids. You have 4 bedrooms and 3 acres of land. It makes perfect sense. We are a family, and family helps each other." "Family?" I asked, taking a deliberate step forward. I didn't shrink away this time. I was no longer the fever-ridden, terrified girl shivering in a damp hallway. I was standing in a fortress built entirely by my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Family threw me into the freezing rain when I was violently ill. Family left me to rot in a rusted, mold-infested camper for 2 freezing winters while you threw lavish dinner parties. You are not my family. You are trespassers." Linda gasped, clutching her designer tote bag to her chest in mock horror. "Lucy, how can you be so cruel and vindictive? We gave you a roof over your head for years. We raised you. You owe us this. You owe your sister." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I turned to Clara, who was now glaring at me, her mask of sweet entitlement slipping to reveal the venom underneath. "But you all made a critical error by coming here today. You see, I anticipated that one day your insatiable greed would lead you to my door, and I prepared for it." I gestured to the sleek, black dome of a high-definition camera mounted directly above the chandelier, its red recording light blinking steadily. "Every inch of this property, inside and out, is equipped with military-grade surveillance," I explained, my tone calm and analytical. "Audio and video. Furthermore, my name is not on the deed to this property. It is owned by an LLC, which is protected by an ironclad, irrevocable trust managed by one of the most aggressive property law firms in the state. I don't technically own this house on paper, which means even if you tried to sue me for family support, you would hit a brick wall of corporate litigation. You cannot touch this house. You cannot touch me." Clara's jaw dropped, her eyes darting toward the camera and then back to me. You put a house in a trust, to hide it from your own flesh and blood. I protected my assets from parasites. I corrected her without blinking. Now, you have exactly 30 seconds to get off my property before I trigger the silent alarm that connects directly to the county sheriff's department. Trespassing on a private, gated estate carries a hefty fine, Clara, and I highly doubt you can afford it right now. Wesley puffed up his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You wouldn't dare call the cops on your own father. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and held my thumb over the digital panic button on my security app. 20 seconds. The silence was deafening. They stared at me, waiting for me to break, waiting for the obedient, submissive daughter to return. But she was dead. She died in a camper 2 years ago. Fine, Clara spat, turning on her heel. You want to play hardball. We'll see about that, you selfish little brat. This isn't over. They stormed out, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind them. I immediately locked the deadbolt, engaged the secondary reinforced locks, and walked straight to my office. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I sat down at my desk, booted up my primary workstation, and began my investigation. If Clara was desperate enough to try and commandeer my home, the situation with Christopher was far worse than simply not working out. I used my extensive knowledge of public databases, court dockets, and digital footprints to start digging into Clara and Christopher's lives. It took me less than 4 hours to uncover the shocking truth. Christopher hadn't just locked her out of their accounts. He had filed for an emergency divorce and full custody of the children. Why? Because Clara had secretly opened over a dozen credit cards in his name, maxed them out on luxury goods, and completely drained their children's college funds to invest in a highly suspicious multi-level marketing scheme that had just collapsed. She was tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and Christopher had compiled an airtight case of financial fraud against her. She wasn't looking for a place to stay. She was looking for an asset to liquidate or leverage to save herself from complete ruin. They returned the very next morning, exactly as I had predicted. I was monitoring the perimeter cameras while drinking my morning coffee when the alerts started chiming. This time, Clara and Linda had arrived in a rented moving truck. They literally parked it directly against my front gate, blocking the entrance completely. Through the high-definition feed, I watched in utter disbelief as Clara and my mother stepped out of the truck and began unloading heavy cardboard boxes right onto the cobblestones outside my property line. They were creating a public spectacle, a forced occupation designed to embarrass me into compliance. I could see Clara holding her phone up, clearly recording herself as she gestured dramatically toward my gate, likely crafting some fictional narrative for her social media followers about her cruel, wealthy sister locking her out in her time of need. I did not open the gate. I did not walk down the driveway. I simply pressed the intercom button on my tablet, projecting my voice loudly through the heavy-duty speakers mounted on the stone pillars of the entrance. "You are blocking a private road," my voice boomed, echoing through the quiet, wooded neighborhood. "Move the vehicle immediately." Linda jumped, dropping a box of kitchen supplies onto the ground. Clara, however, marched directly up to the intercom speaker, her face twisted in a mask of furious entitlement. "Open the gate, Lucy," Clara screamed, completely dropping the sweet sister act. "You are not going to humiliate me. We are moving in. I have nowhere else to go, and you are living in a mansion by yourself. It's completely unnatural. Mom and Dad agree that this house should be family property." "Your housing crisis is not my responsibility," I replied evenly, my voice devoid of any emotion. I was perfectly safe behind my walls, watching her unravel on a high-definition screen. "But since you want to broadcast your situation, let's talk about the real reason you are standing in my driveway. Let's talk about Christopher." Clara froze, the frantic, aggressive energy suddenly drained from her posture. She looked around nervously, her eyes wide. What about him?" "I know everything, Clara," I stated, making sure my voice carried clearly over the intercom so Linda could hear every single word. "I know about the emergency divorce filings in the county court. I know about the $75,000 in secret credit card debt you accrued in his name. I know that you drained your own children's college funds to buy into a fraudulent pyramid scheme. You aren't just looking for a bedroom. You are running from the massive legal and financial consequences of your own deceit. Shut up, Clara shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. She slammed her hands against the stone pillar. You don't know anything, you're making that up. Mom, don't listen to her, she's lying. Linda looked deeply confused, staring at Clara with a sudden, dawning horror. Clara, what is she talking about? You said Christopher just had a midlife crisis. She's lying to you, Mom, I continued, pressing my advantage. She is facing potential fraud charges, and she thought she could bully me into signing over this house so she could use it as collateral for her debts. She is trying to steal my home to pay for her crimes. Clara's face turned violently red. The polished, perfect facade completely shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered antagonist underneath. She pointed a trembling finger at the camera. I will destroy you, Lucy. I will go to a lawyer. I'll tell them you are mentally unstable and incapable of managing your assets. I have power of attorney over Mom and Dad, and I will have them testify that you owe us every penny of this property. You are nothing without this family. It was a poorly executed, pathetic threat, a bluff born of pure desperation. You have no legal standing, no money, and no credibility, I countered calmly. And I have you entirely on camera threatening to file false legal claims against me to steal my property. I am sending this footage to my lawyer immediately. If you do not move that truck in the next 60 seconds, the police will be called, and I will press charges for harassment and trespassing. Clara let out a primal scream of frustration, a sound so ugly and raw it made my skin crawl. She grabbed Linda by the arm, dragging her towards the rented truck. They practically threw the boxes back into the back, the doors slamming with echoing finality. As they sped away, leaving black tire marks on the asphalt, I knew the battle was far from over. Clara was wounded, which meant she was about to become incredibly dangerous. The following 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Clara, utterly desperate to regain control of the narrative, escalated her tactics. The very next afternoon, 2 police cruisers arrived at my front gate, lights flashing. I walked down the driveway to meet them, keeping the gate closed between us. The lead officer informed me that they had received a frantic call from my sister requesting an emergency wellness check. Clara had explicitly told dispatch that I was severely mentally ill, off my medication, and was holding myself hostage in a house that she legally co-owned. I didn't panic. I didn't raise my voice. I simply handed the officer my business card, the contact information for my corporate lawyer, and the LLC documents proving my sole, impenetrable ownership of the property. Then, I pulled up the security footage from the intercom confrontation the day before, showing Clara screaming and making false threats. The officer's expressions quickly shifted from concerned to deeply irritated. They realized instantly that they were being used as pawns in a petty, vindictive family dispute. They apologized for the intrusion, documented the false report, and assured me they would be paying a very stern visit to Clara to warn her about misusing emergency services. But my investigation hadn't stopped with Christopher. As I watched the police cruisers leave, I dug deeper into my family's financial records. If Clara was desperate enough to steal from her husband, I knew she wouldn't hesitate to exploit the people who had blindly enabled her for decades. It took hours of combing through online property tax records and publicly filed mortgage liens, but I finally found the smoking gun. It was a document so shocking that it made me physically sick to my stomach. Clara hadn't just taken out credit cards. 6 months ago, using the very power of attorney she had bragged about during her screaming match at my gate, she had taken out a massive, high-interest second mortgage on Wesley and Linda's house. She had forged their signatures as primary beneficiaries, funneling the cash directly into her failing investments. My parents were completely oblivious, and the balloon payments were scheduled to start next month. If they didn't pay, they would lose their home entirely. The manipulated loved ones were about to become the primary victims. I picked up my phone and dialed Wesley's number. It was the first time I had called him in 2 years. He answered on the third ring, his voice dripping with condescension. "Finally decided to stop throwing a tantrum, Lucy," he grumbled, ready to apologize to your sister and act like a grown adult. "Dad," I said, my voice completely devoid of anger, filled only with a chilling seriousness. "You and Mom need to come to my house right now. Just the two of you. Do not tell Clara you are coming. If you bring her, I will not open the gate." "I am not playing these games with you." "This is not a game, Dad," I interrupted, my tone slicing through his bluster. "I have documents from the county clerk's office regarding the deed to your house. If you want to know why Clara is really trying to move into my home, you will be here in 20 minutes. I hung up before he could argue. 25 minutes later, Wesley's truck pulled up to the gate. I buzzed them in, walking out to the front porch to meet them. They looked exhausted, irritated, and deeply defensive. I didn't invite them inside. I simply handed Wesley a thick manila envelope. "Open it," I instructed. Wesley tore open the envelope, pulling out the highlighted copies of the second mortgage lien. Linda peered over his shoulder. I watched in absolute silence as their eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, tracing the massive six-figure loan amount, and finally landing on the forged signatures at the bottom of the page. What is this?" Wesley stammered, the color completely draining from his face. His hands began to shake violently. "This says we took out a loan against the house. We didn't do this. We paid off our mortgage 5 years ago." "You didn't do it, Dad," I said quietly, the irrefutable proof lying heavily in his trembling hands. "Clara did. She used the power of attorney you gave her. She drained the equity in your home, and the payments start in 3 weeks. If you don't pay, the bank will foreclose. She didn't come here because she needs space. She came here because she ruined her family, and now she's ruined you, and she was hoping to steal my home before the absolute truth finally caught up with her." Linda let out a suffocated sob, collapsing against Wesley's shoulder. The impenetrable spell of the golden child had finally, irreversibly broken. The climax of this agonizing saga did not happen in the sterile environment of a courtroom or the quiet solitude of my driveway. It happened exactly where Clara felt she held the most power, in front of an audience. Still entirely unaware that Wesley and Linda had seen the forged mortgage documents, Clara orchestrated what she called an emergency family unity dinner at a highly exclusive, upscale Italian restaurant downtown. She had invited our extended family, aunts, uncles, and several cousins who had historically bought into her flawless victim narrative. Her goal was incredibly transparent. She intended to use the pressure of a public setting and the judgment of our extended relatives to corner me into signing away my home or offering a massive financial settlement to save her from her impending divorce. She had no idea she was walking directly into a trap that her own parents had helped me set. When I arrived at the restaurant, the private dining room was already buzzing with the low, tense murmurs of my extended family. The long mahogany table was set with pristine white tablecloths, sparkling crystal water glasses, and heavy silverware. Clara sat at the very head of the table, wearing a completely unearned expression of sorrowful martyrdom, dabbing at her dry eyes with a linen napkin. Wesley and Linda sat quietly to her right, their faces pale, their eyes fixed firmly on their empty plates. As I walked into the room, the conversation immediately died. The silence was heavy, suffocating, and dripping with collective judgment. My Aunt Patricia, a woman who had always favored Clara, glared at me over the rim of her wine glass. "I'm so glad you decided to show up, Lucy," Clara announced, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed emotion. She stood up, commanding the attention of the entire room. "We are all here today because family is the most important thing in the world. As you all know, I am going through a terrible, unforeseen hardship. Christopher has abandoned us. My children are suffering. And yet, my own sister, who lives alone in a massive, empty estate, has slammed her gates in my face and refused to offer even the smallest ounce of grace." A collective murmur of disapproval rippled through the aunts and uncles. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I walked calmly to the opposite end of the long table, carrying a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. I placed it on the mahogany surface and unzipped it with a loud, deliberate sound that cut through the tension. "I appreciate you bringing everyone together, Clara," I began, my voice perfectly steady, projecting clearly to every corner of the private room. "Because transparency is incredibly important when dealing with family matters. You've told everyone here that Christopher abandoned you. You've told them that you are the victim of unforeseen hardship. But that is a complete, categorical lie." "How dare you?" Clara shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "You selfish, ungrateful." "I have the emergency divorce filings right here," I continued smoothly, pulling a thick stack of stapled papers from the portfolio and sliding them down the center of the table. "Christopher filed for full custody because you secretly opened 14 credit cards in his name, accumulating over $75,000 in debt to fund a fraudulent pyramid scheme. You also completely drained the college funds he set up for the twins." The room erupted into shocked gasps. Aunt Patricia's jaw dropped, her wine glass hovering midway to the table. Clara's face drained of all color, her meticulously crafted facade cracking into a mask of pure terror. "That's a lie." Clara screamed, her voice cracking frantically. "Those are fake. She printed those out to ruin me. Mom, Dad, tell them she's crazy." She looked desperately at Wesley and Linda, expecting them to rush to her defense, to enable her just as they had done for 33 years. But they didn't move. "And while we are discussing financial fraud," I stated, pulling out a second, brightly highlighted document, "let's talk about the real reason you are so desperately trying to steal my home. Because your money is completely gone and your crimes are catching up to you." I held up the second mortgage lien, making sure the forged signatures were visible. 6 months ago, Clara used the power of attorney she manipulated our parents into signing to secretly take out a massive second mortgage on their house, I revealed, the words dropping like anvils onto the silent room. "She forged their signatures. She stole the equity they worked their entire lives to build, and she dumped it all into a failed investment. The balloon payments start next month." If she had succeeded in stealing my house, she would have let our parents' home go into foreclosure without a second thought. "Clara," Aunt Patricia whispered, staring at my sister with absolute horror, "is this true?" Clara looked around the room, realizing in real time that every single exit was blocked by the irrefutable truth. She tried to speak, but only a pathetic, suffocated squeak escaped her lips. Then, Wesley stood up. He didn't look like the angry, arrogant man who had thrown me into the freezing rain 2 years ago. He looked like a father whose heart had been entirely shattered. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a notarized legal document. "It is entirely true," Wesley said, his voice thick with devastating sorrow and a newfound, righteous anger. He looked directly at Clara, his eyes blazing. "You stole from your husband, you stole from your children, and you stole the roof right from over our heads. We gave you everything, and you nearly destroyed us." Wesley threw the document onto the table in front of Clara. "This is the immediate revocation of your power of attorney," Wesley announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, reclaiming his role as the protector of the family. But this time, he was protecting himself and me. "I spent the morning at the bank and the police station. We have filed formal fraud and forgery charges against you. You are to leave this restaurant right now, Clara. Do not ever come to our house again. Do not ever speak to your sister again. You are entirely on your own." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara looked at the papers, then at the disgusted faces of her extended family, and finally at me. There was nothing left to manipulate. The well was completely dry. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking violently, and fled the private dining room, her sobbing echoing down the hallway until she disappeared completely from our lives. The downfall of Clara was swift, severe, and entirely of her own making. The walls she had built on a foundation of lies crumbled instantly. Christopher was granted full custody of the children and was legally absolved of the fraudulent debt she had accrued in his name. The bank, presented with undeniable proof of the forged signatures, launched a full criminal investigation. Clara was facing multiple counts of felony fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Socially, she was an absolute pariah. The extended family, having witnessed her unmasking at the dinner, completely severed ties. She was forced to move into a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment on the other side of the state, awaiting her criminal trial with no family, no friends, and no safety net left to exploit. For me, the aftermath was a journey of profound, unexpected healing. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I invited Wesley and Linda to my home. This time, I opened the gates freely. They drove up the cobblestone driveway and walked into my grand foyer not as demands or trespassers, but as deeply humbled, remorseful guests. We sat out on my expansive back deck, overlooking the serene, wooded acres as the afternoon sun filtered through the tall pine trees. I served them tea, and for a long time we just listened to the quiet rustling of the leaves. "We are so sorry, Lucy," Wesley finally said, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Every day, I think about that night in the storm. I think about you living in that camper while we were completely blind to the monster we were raising. We failed you. We failed you so completely." Linda reached across the table, gently taking my hand. Her grip was weak, trembling with genuine regret. "You are the strongest, most brilliant person I know. You built this beautiful life all by yourself, despite us. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we are so deeply, deeply sorry." I looked at them, seeing not the imposing, terrifying figures of my childhood, but two flawed, aging people who had finally woken up from a decades-long manipulation. The anger that had fueled me during those freezing nights in the camper had finally burned out, replaced by a steady, enduring peace. "I forgive you," I said softly, and I meant it. "But things have to be different now. There are boundaries that will never be crossed again." They agreed instantly, nodding through their tears. I didn't just offer them forgiveness. I used the power I had meticulously built to ensure they were safe. I retained my aggressive corporate lawyer on their behalf, paying the exorbitant retainer fee out of my own pocket. Within 2 months, my legal team successfully navigated the fraud case, forcing the bank to void the fraudulent second mortgage and completely clearing the lien on my parents' home. They wouldn't lose the house they had worked so hard for. I ensured that justice was served, not through vengeance, but through decisive, protective action. Life finally settled into a beautiful, quiet rhythm. I no longer spent my days looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next crisis or the next demand for my money. I sat on my deck in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, feeling the solid, unbreakable oak floors of my fortress beneath my feet. I had walked through the freezing rain, survived the bitter cold of the camper, and built an empire of peace. The storm was finally over, and I was exactly where I belonged,